Come on. Sorry. So awkward. Okay. So today, first day of Baroque art. So what we're going to focus on is um, right now just looking at examples of Baroque art and then trying to see if we can figure out how it's different from all the Renaissance art that we just spent that whole unit talking about. So first, here's just an example. You don't have to write anything down for this yet or type anything down for this yet, but I just want you to look at this painting. So there's lots of differences that we see between the Renaissance and the Baroque. So this is Jesus after he has returned from the dead off the cross. And one of his disciples is poking his finger into his open wound to show that he indeed was dead. That should have killed him, but he is now back from the dead. So this is obviously still a Christian story. So we still see roots in Catholicism, but it's different. It's markedly different than portrayals of Jesus from the Renaissance. So let's continue. So here is another story from the Bible. So we're still in following this pattern of Christian themes. But so this is Yael. She lures Sisera into the tent and then drives a stake into his head. So not only should we be seeing a difference in how these biblical stories are actually portrayed, but in the actual paintings themselves, the colors and the light are drastically different in the Baroque than the Renaissance. Here's another biblical story. So we have Judith slaying Holofernes, the Assyrian general who once held Israel. Judith beheads the general after he's passed out drunk in this tent. So we see the actual blood coming out of his throat. Trigger warning. Sorry, that was late. So again, biblical story. We see a drastic difference in the light and dark in the background, and we see lots of violence. Here's another Baroque painting. This is David and Goliath, so just the same David from the statue that we talked about by Michelangelo, and he has beheaded Goliath with the sword. So we see the giant's head kind of leaking blood and ligaments. All right, so what is similar about all of these images? If you said blood and violence, you win a prize. Look at all the knowledge you have. So we're going to talk about why as we go through this unit. So the Baroque period began around 1600. So it does overlap with the Renaissance some. The church wanted to attract new worshipers by intriguing architecture in cathedrals and basilicas. So we're going to see lots more architecture, all this other stuff. Okay, so during the Baroque period, what is going on in history? So this is just some historical context. We have the 30 Years' War happening. So this is the religious war between Catholics and Protestants in the Holy Roman Empire. So this is a big deal. So this is why the Catholic Church is starting to pay for a lot of art and trying to kind of try a different style to attract people to Catholicism, because there is a religious war happening. So the Protestant Reformation is when Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, completely different person, ask your history teacher, nails his thesis to the Catholic Church, talking about all the things, how the Catholic Church is corrupt, and all of these people then follow him, break off from the Catholic Church, and form a new sect of Christianity. We have increased trade and growth of slavery, okay? When you don't pay the people that are doing the work for you, you are wealthier. Right, it's just a basic economics rule. So by exploiting people, by exploiting paid labor, the wealthy class is wealthier. So they have a lot more money to spend on building buildings and art. We have new science theories happening at the time. We now have people saying for the first time that the sun is the center of the universe and not the earth. So there's lots of things happening with Catholicism and moving away from that with both science and Protestantism. All right, so how did these things affect art? Religious subject matter became predominant because the Pope wanted to make Rome the center, the cultural center of the Western world. So the Catholic Church is now paying for a ton of art. The Council of Trent suggested religious art be directed towards clarity, realism, and emotion to increase understanding among everyday people. So when we think about the symbolism, we saw lots of symbolism in Renaissance art, like this is in a triangle, this is looking to the left. We saw lots of references to ancient Greece and Rome. But now the Council of Trent has said religious art needs to be available to the everyday person. They need to be able to look at it and know exactly what's going on. They don't need to be able to have any knowledge of ancient Greece or Rome or any knowledge of symbolism to be able to understand this art. So it's supposed to be more realistic so people can just look at it and know exactly what it is without having anyone explain it to them. Protestants avoided religious subject matter altogether. So we're going to see lots of Protestant paintings from the Scandinavian countries where they have more thoroughly broken away from Catholicism. So we're going to see that a lot in Rembrandt. So if you see a landscape painting from this time, it's almost guaranteed that that painter is Protestant and not Catholic. Again, increased trade meant increased wealth, which meant they had more money to spend on art. All right, so what are the basic characteristics of Baroque art? This is considered the most sumptuous and ornate of the art periods. Art was expanded into everyday life. Light was used to create an emotional impact. We saw that in those earlier, in the first paintings we looked at today. The subject, the people, are in the light. Everything else is in shadow. We're not paying attention to the background anymore. The classical elements were used without classical restraint. So that means we are no longer afraid to show actual violence and gore. And art was meant to speak to the illiterate masses instead of the well-informed wealthy. So again, the audience has changed. So here we can see a difference. This is another statue of David from the Baroque period. So we can see how different it is from the Michelangelo statue. He is in motion. He is mid-fight. So instead of thinking about violence or being, contemplating it stoically, just standing there still, this is mid-fight. You can see the determination, the anger on his face. Here is some of the Baroque architecture. It's ornate. This is what we mean by ornate. There is lots of ornamentation, all kinds of extra stuff. There's 20 fountains at this palace. Here's another sculpture. This is the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa by Bernini. We see she is currently receiving a vision from God. This is a Spanish painting. This is of the royal family of Spain by Velázquez. Here's the Night Watch by Rembrandt. So this is not a religious painting. So Rembrandt was a Protestant. All right, so when did it start? It started in Italy. It comes from the term barocco, which literally just means misshapen pearl in Portuguese. So if you take that and you interpret it, so the pearl would be the Renaissance, and then the misshapen pearl is the Baroque. So it's built off of the Baroque Renaissance perfection style, but then it has been changed and adapted to that misshapen. It did become an international phenomenon, so it spreads everywhere throughout Europe. The Catholics used Baroque art to teach the illiterate about the church, and then the Protestants thought that worshipers should rely on the Bible alone and not use any artist interpretation of the gospel. So if you were Protestant, you got your religious instruction from the Bible only, not from an interpretation by Michelangelo. Imperfections were seen as beautiful. Okay, so instead of idealizing people like they did in the Renaissance and making them all seem godlike in perfect forms, they were shown as imperfect because God created them that way. All right, so building on the things from the Renaissance. So chiaroscuro, that dramatic change between light and dark, that was invented during the Renaissance and then perfected and used much more widely during the Baroque. Then we also now have in the Baroque something called tenebrism. This is based on the Italian word for murky. So this creates a look of figures emerging from the dark. Okay, so it's almost like all of the people in the paintings have a spotlight on them, but the background is entirely in shadow. Like this. So it's like he has a spotlight on him. All right, so Michelangelo Merisi di Caravaggio. So Michelangelo is a popular name, just like Michael, at the time. But when we talk about Michelangelo, we're meaning the one from the Renaissance. So this guy is referred to by his last name, Caravaggio. 1573 to 1610. He was considered the most revolutionary artist of his time. He was characterized by his temper. Ooh. He was imprisoned for assault and murder. Yes, so the violent paintings make sense, right? However, he died 2 days after he received his pardon. He did not idealize the human form or the religious experience. He was considered somewhat vulgar and profane at the time. He was orphaned at age 11, went to Rome at age 15, and found a patron, the Cardinal Francesco del Monte. So, again, that's the Catholic Church funding art. And his first commissions were scenes of the life of St. Matthew. We'll talk a lot about those later. So, this is one of those paintings. This is The Calling of St. Matthew from 1602. It caused an outcry because of the realistic portrayal of this man who would eventually become a saint. Okay? So normally we think about Renaissance art. It's very clear who the holy figures are. They have some sort of halo around them. They're in that triangle shape, and their head is at the pinnacle of the triangle, or they're in a church or in a cross, or they're doing something holy. But here we have St. Matthew, or the man who would become St. Matthew, just Matthew at this point, shown in a tavern, doing everyday normal people stuff. So people were shocked by this. We see here, so this hand that's outstretched is an allusion to the Sistine ceiling, where we have God creating Adam with the finger touch. Here is another. This is the conversion of St. Paul. Again, he has now fallen off his horse. All kinds of things are showing this man in a not holy way. So people were shocked by this initially. It's different than other versions of this scene, as Jesus is not atop a throne surrounded by angels while he's converting Paul to Christianity. So here are some differences. So this is on the left, we have Michelangelo's depiction of the scene, the conversion of Paul, and here we have Caravaggio. So again, not only the style of the painting is drastically different, we have a drastic reduction in the amount of colors used, the light is completely different, but the unholy portrayal of this future saint is different, right? So let's talk about the painting again. So St. Paul hears the word of God while he's riding along on his horse, shocked, falls off his horse, and then is then blinded. So why is this painting important? We have the religious art being secularized. If I didn't tell you that this is religious painting, you probably wouldn't realize it's a religious painting. So we have saints and miracles depicted as ordinary events. So what elements and principles of art? We have the audience brought into the action through chiaroscuro, tenebrism, and perspective. So that difference in light and dark. We are now zoomed in on the scene. Okay, so we have everything else in the background in shadow. It's unimportant. So why was it controversial? Its saint is depicted on the ground instead of elevated, and believe it or not, people were mad that you could see the horse's butt. Right there. All right, moving on to Rembrandt. He is our biggest Protestant painter. Rembrandt, Harmenzoon van Rijn, 1606 to 1669. He was born in Leiden, Denmark. He was the son of a miller, so was not a super rich upbringing. He later married Saskia van Ulenbark in 1634, and then after their marriage was the period of his greatest success. This is when he was both commercially successful, meaning he was making quite a bit of money, and considered his greatest paintings. However, Saskia died in 1642, and this was a turning point in his art. His paintings were characterized by luxurious brushwork, rich color, and a mastery of chiaroscuro, that light and dark difference. So characteristics of Rembrandt. He is considered the greatest Dutch artist. He was a painter, a draftsman, and an etcher. He did numerous portraits and self-portraits. He painted himself over 50 times. If you can't have anything else to paint, you can always, what you look like. Commissioned for portraits and religious subjects. So here are some of his etches. This is Christ healing the sick. Again, you can tell because he's got the halo. And here are some of his self-portraits. So he did not shy away from showing himself aging, which is kind of that new phenomenon in Baroque about being realistic to the human form. So as he aged and got wrinkly and looked sicker, he showed himself that way. All right, here's one of his most famous paintings called The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Tulip. So this is literally a doctor who was performing an autopsy, dissecting human flesh to try and figure and to show these students anatomy, the skeleture. All right, this is the painting of Rembrandt that we're going to talk about quite a bit, and this is called The Night Watch from 1642. So it's right at that turning point of his career. So this is the Night Watch is a militia company. And each man is painted with the detail of an individual portrait. So if you zoom in, they each have extreme details to their faces. So let's talk about this some more. It shows Coke's company welcoming Marie de Medici, who's the Queen of France at the time, to the Amsterdam Gate. We have the painting moves in diagonal axes. You can see there's people moving this way and then this way, going diagonally away from each other. So why was it controversial? Each person in this painting paid the exact same amount of money to be featured in this painting, but they were all not painted as equally, right? So if you were this guy right here in the back, you'd probably be a little bit upset that you paid the same amount of money as this guy, right? Makes sense. So this is right during the turning point of his career, finished it as his wife was dying. All right, Bernini, our sculptor of the period. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, 1598 to 1680. So he lived to be old, 82 for this time period. He was a sculptor and an architect. He's considered the last great artist to be commissioned by the popes. His major works include St. Peter's Piazza, another statue of David, the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, and the Cornaro Chapel, which we'll look at all of those. So here's St. Peter's Piazza. So this is one of his architectural designs. And here's the inside of the Cornaro Chapel. You can see lots of ornate, lots of gold, lots of details with those flower carvings. And here is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. So this is the sculpture inside the Cornaro Chapel. You can see the details of her face as she is mid-vision from God. All right, 1645 to 1652. So this took 7 years to sculpt. The entire chapel is designed to highlight this sculpture. So the Cornaro Chapel is designed that way to be able to shine more light and be centered around the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. The balconies of the chapel are literally painted with spectators looking down on the sculpture. It depicts St. Teresa when she sees a vision and hears the voices of God. Then a saint and angel appear to be on swirling clouds around her. So we have those themes again of the Baroque of showing heightened passion, emotion, and drama. She doesn't have a stoic face. She's very much in the throes of the vision. So here is another example of Bernini, marble turned to flesh. So just like we talked about with Michelangelo's David, this is not clay that you mold and sculpt easily. This is marble that you have to chisel with a hammer and then sand down to get this smooth texture. It is extraordinarily difficult. All right, here's Bernini's David. So let's compare. So here we have Donatello's David from 1409, 6-foot statue in bronze. Here we have Michelangelo's statue from 1504, 16-foot statue in marble. And then we have Bernini's statue of David from 1623, 6-foot statue in marble. So we can see the progression and the change of time periods here. So this is the early Renaissance, the high Renaissance, and now in the Baroque. So not only differences in technique and the kind of development of engineering to be able to portray the sculpture mid-throw, but the difference in emotion. So in Donatello's statue, this has happened after the fight. He's victorious. He's kind of standing there being like, yeah, I killed that giant. Michelangelo's is before the fight. He is contemplating. He is looking to the left. He's thinking about what he's about to do. And then Bernini's is during the fight. So at the heightened emotion of the period. All right, you can see him kind of mid-throw. So how is Bernini's David more emotional? What changes can you see that developed from the Renaissance into the Baroque? All right, so now on your, this is not on your notes, this is on the artist comparison. This is another sheet. I want you to pick 3 of the works that we talked about today, and you're just gonna fill out this table. So name the work, who's in it? Is it a saint? Is it The Night Watch, who is it? What characteristics of that painting are Baroque, and why was it controversial? All right. Baroque's fun. Hi.